Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Tanya in honor of Shira Bas Shifra Rosa, Eliza Bas Shifra Rosa, and Yochanan Zusha Halevi Ben Shifra Rosa. We are up to chapter 9, which I'm just going to pull up for you over here, so those of you who are watching this can see the screen. Chapter 9 begins an outline of our inner battle. So let's just review where we have come from to get to this point. The Alter Rebbe begins Tanya by speaking about the animal soul. Interestingly, this lower aspect of our self is the first soul because that's our primary mission. Our work here is with the lower, more animalistic, visceral part of who we are. And then in chapter 2, he speaks about Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael, the second soul, which is the godly soul. Chapter 2 speaks about the identity of the soul. Chapter 3 about the powers, the soul powers, and chapter 4 about the garments. And then in chapter 5, he speaks about a specific commandment. The commandments constitute the garments, and that is Torah, where he speaks about consciousness and the unique thing that happens when you mesh with an idea, when you download it. So you get that idea, you contain it, and at the same time you are contained by something that you understand. And then in chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe introduces the animal soul, which he sets up as a mirror image, in some sense an inverse image of the godly soul, but it too has intellectual soul powers and so too emotional. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe defines the emotional attributes of the animal soul as what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So sometimes people are confused as to the distinction between those two things. The emotions, those shadow emotions that govern us, would be what we conventionally refer to as the Yetzer Hara, but the animal soul is the entire edifice, the entire structure. And then in chapters 7 and 8, we spoke about desire and self-betrayal and being consumed by our own demons in terms of how we engage with things that are permitted but overindulged in, or things that are forbidden. So what we're going to begin today is chapter 9, and I just want to stress the fact that there is a new understanding that is brought through these previous chapters of Tanya, and that is of our dual identity. This book is not about the battle of the soul against the body. That really allows no room for resolution. It's like the question, I think it was supposedly asked by medieval scholastics, how many angels can dance on the head of a needle, or how much place does an angel take? Interestingly, in spiritual Kabbalistic terms, when we speak about something being material, it's more temporal and spatial. Spiritual is less temporal and spatial. So in that sense, a stone is more physical, more material than water, which is fluid, and air, which you can't really grasp, you can't hold it. You could cup it in your palms, but it's more spiritual than a stone. And so too along the continuum of creation, all the way to angelic beings, which depending on how much space and time they occupy, would be their spirituality. Even thoughts take space. They occupy space in our mind, as scientific imaging of the brain has demonstrated. But that idea of body and soul in battle isn't accurate. We need to bring the notion of two souls struggling for control of one body. And having set up the foundational concepts, the Alter Rebbe now goes on to explore this. So let's begin by looking at the first chapter for this lesson, of the first paragraph of chapter 9. V'hine mokem mishkan nefesh habahamis shemiklipas nega b'cholish Yisrael hu believe. Let's pause there. He tells us that the sanctuary of our animal soul is in the heart. The word sanctuary is from Mishkan, is from the word shochen, to rest or dwell. Where does it sit In some way, it's like an embassy. So if you imagine walking into the French embassy in New York, what you have is a little piece of France. As soon as you cross the threshold, the laws of France apply and not the laws of America. Similarly, if you'd be on a French boat or ship, I think that if a baby is born on a plane, they have citizenship of that country. And the temple functioned that way. The temple was God's embassy on earth. Divine laws applied there that were not the same as the laws that govern the rest of physical reality. So in our case over here, what we're talking about is the sanctuary or the embassy. Where are the headquarters of each respective soul? The animal soul is in the heart. And then he goes on to qualify, and he says, V'cholol smiley, in the left ventricle, shehu mole dam, which is full of blood, ksiv ki adam hu hanefesh. Brings a proof text. The blood is the nefesh, the spirit, the vital spirit of a person. Why does he say the left ventricle is full of blood when we know, of course, that there's blood in the right ventricle? Is because he's speaking about oxygenated blood. So oxygenated blood is on the left side of the heart, and then the deoxygenated blood, as it comes back to the heart, that blue blood that we have in our veins is in the right side of the heart. So here he tells us this left side has this vital red soul, and that is the embassy, the sanctuary of the animal soul that's full of passion. And we've spoken before about this animal soul in terms of the Talmudic teaching. There's much produce in the strength of an ox. The ox remains an ox, but it's what plows the field. And so too, we plow the field of this world of physical reality through the vitality that is there in the left ventricle of our heart. And it's not just that the soul is there in a general way, he tells us, and therefore, all our various emotions are in the heart. And I'm going to pull up an image for you. Let's see. I hope that this will, there we go. So I want you just to bear this in mind as we go through the teachings. This is a part of the tree of life. Chesed is loving kindness. According to the Ramak, its color is blue, like the rising sun. And then the setting sun is Gabura. Here you have the sun in the center, Tiferet, which is also harmony, empathy, truth, and beauty. The left one, Gabura, being severity or strength. And what the Alter Rebbe tells us is that all of our desires, our boastfulness, and our anger are also in the heart, because that's the embassy of the animal soul. And I think that the notion of taiva, desire, is connected with love because we are drawn to things that we love. Anger, of course, is connected. It's an unholy manifestation of Gevura, and Hispyrus, boastfulness. Well, you think you're more beautiful than you are. That would be connected with this particular attribute. So just bear that in mind as we go through the rest of the text. He tells us that these are in the heart, or mehalev, and from the heart, hein mispashtos, they spread out they spread out into the whole body and also rise to the brain that is in the head. Just hold that idea that the word here is mayach in the singular, because the brain and the consciousness in the brain are functioning in full service of the desires, the shadow feelings of the animal soul. And he tells us from there they spread out to the whole body. There's this visceral response that we're all aware of. Let's say you get a fright and there is this visceral response of fear that is all over the body. That's coming from the heart and also a trigger to the brain. The animal soul moves around the body and it enters into the brain, and what happens over there is that we begin cogitating, thinking about it. He says, "Lachshoy v'lohare bahen." We think about them and we cogitate, we go back and forth. It's like obsessive thinking. When you speak about OCD, the obsession there is thoughts, and the compulsion is the behavior. Even if our thoughts aren't obsessive in a clinical sense, we just keep going back to whatever it was that bothered us, or something that we want, and we can't let go of that thought. And then he tells us to make ourselves clever in these things. What comes to my mind is a child who wants a chocolate chip cookie that's on the shelf. It's too high. There's the desire. That desire fills his or her body, and then there are thoughts. How am I going to get it? Okay, I could move the chair to the counter, climb up on the counter, open the cabinet, get the cookie, right? So I'm becoming wise in them. And what's significant for us in this respect is that the thoughts of the animal soul are always there to serve those selfish feelings, the shadow feelings. So even though we may identify them as thoughts, they would more accurately be described as rationalizations. And he gives a physical analogy for this. Just like the blood, its source is in the heart. The blood moves from the heart to all the organs, and so to the brain that is in the head. So that physical analogy is exact in terms of the functioning of the animal soul. There's a beautiful teaching that a person is called Olam Katan, and the world is called Guf Gadol. A person is a small world, and the universe is a large body. There are these correlations between our body and the whole universe. And that also applies in terms of body and soul. That's part of the meaning, one of the etymological roots of Kabbalah, lahagabil, to align. We have to keep looking for these alignments between different levels of reality. So just as the blood relates to the organs of the body, the entire body and the brain, so to the animal soul spreads out its influence viscerally in the body, and activating thoughts in the brain. So that then is the animal soul. It's not the same when it comes to the godly soul. But the sanctuary, the embassy of the godly soul, is in the brains that are in the head. And here you'll notice, as I mentioned previously, there's a distinction, the word moichin, two brains, meaning the right and left hemisphere. Here with the animal soul, it was just the word moyach, one brain, because the brain works in a singular kind of sense to serve the feelings of the animal soul. When it comes to the godly soul, we're speaking about two kinds of consciousness. And just as we have the right and the left of the tree of life, when it comes to emotion, so too with consciousness. We have chokhmah and bina, wisdom and understanding. I've spoken before when we discussed the soul powers in chapter 3. I like to think of wisdom as conceptualizing or conceiving of ideas, and bina, understanding, as analyzing ideas. And then you come to das, knowledge, which is useful to think of as internalizing an idea. It's the place where there's a marriage that begins to happen between head and heart. So the right brain is conception, and that word is significant. We conceive an idea the same way that a woman would conceive a child, by receiving seed. So too our consciousness receives from the supra-conscious powers of faith and delight and will, and from there something is activated in the right brain. The mystics speak about barak hamavrik, this flashing of a light. So the light, or the image of the seed, is what enters into the right brain. That's the conception, and it's quite amorphous. And then that moves across the membrane into the left brain, where we are analyzing. It's more structured, formulating an idea. So these are the two brains that are in the head, and what happens, just as the animal soul spread out to the body, so too does the godly soul. From there it moves out to all the organs, and of course we have the spine that is an extension, and the nervous system. There are other ways that the information in the brain is communicated to the body, and so too v'gam b'lev b'cholol hayemini. It also enters into the heart, the right ventricle of the heart, and here the Rebbe says she'ein bo dam. It doesn't have blood. It doesn't mean that there is no blood in the right ventricle, but as we said, there is no oxygenated blood. And here he brings another proof text. He says, as is written, Lev chacham liyemino. The wise of the heart of the wise person is to his right. What that means is that a wise person is governed by that ventricle, meaning the consciousness of the godly soul whose embassy is in the right ventricle. And what's going to happen there? Just as with the soul powers of the animal soul he spoke about 3 particular emotions. He spoke about taivas, desire, hispyrus, boastfulness, and kas, anger. So to here, he's going to articulate and define for us the different kinds of feelings that are associated with the animal soul. You'll notice with the godly soul, with the animal soul, first there's a discussion about the emotions and then the intellect, because the animal soul is primarily emotive and its thoughts are rationalizations or justifications for what it feels. The godly soul is primarily intellective and through consciousness generates feelings. We tend to think of our feelings as arising spontaneously, but those are the animal soul's feelings. It's much more difficult to come by the feelings of the godly soul because we have to actually create them, or at the very least nurture them. There is a love for God that is innate. It's latent and present in all of our hearts. This is called Ava Mesoteres, the hidden love. It's something that the Rebbe discusses later. I think it's chapter 18, where he speaks about those things that activate this hidden love. For example, being threatened with death if one doesn't serve an idol. And he says there, this latent, innate love, the Ava Mesoteres, could be covered up an entire lifetime. But when that threat comes, it's suddenly awoken and realizes, I can't do that. I can't bow down to an idol because I will be cutting off all of who I am. We'll get to that in a couple of chapters. Here, he's speaking about the ability of consciousness to create feelings, and there are feelings that we can generate through contemplation, meditation, learning, and there are feelings that we can activate through our understanding. So he says, what are these feelings? V'hi avas Hashem karish shel heves mislaheves b'leiv maskilim hamavinim u'misbainim b'daitem asher b'meicham b'dvarim hama'erim es ha'ava. This is love that burns like leaping flames. Shel hevet lahav is a flame. There are these leaping flames of love in the heart of those who invest their intellect. They are maskilim, intellectuals who understand and also contemplate. They have it doesn't come easily. Look at all of those verbs and adjectives. We're not going to give birth to what we want without the effort. Nothing is for free. As the previous Rebbe says, without hot and cold water, tears and sweat, you're not going to make any progress. Like our expression, blood, sweat, and tears, right? It takes effort. And we understand if I want to lose weight, get healthy, I'm going to have to reduce calories. If I want to increase my muscular strength, I'll have to work out. But the idea that I want emotional freedom and inner peace is something many of us think of as like a right, or that it should happen naturally. Here he's telling us, no, if you want to create the true feelings, not the peace that comes after indulging in our desires or letting our anger out of the bag, but the true inner peace and joy, love, respect that we crave, that has to come through consciousness. And you're thinking about those things which awaken love. So that's the first feeling that he speaks about, connected to chesed. And then he comes to joy, which is connected to the attribute, the spiritual soul power of Tiferet, beauty or compassion. That heart center where the yellow sun was is also, of course, connected to joy. He says, "V'chein simchas levav," joy of the heart. And this is not a joy because I got something. We all know you set a goal and you attain it, and then we're driven by our desires and our ambition. As soon as we attain something, the joy we pursue is elusive. It lasts for a minute. You aim for something and you get it, and then you've got it. And now what? So here he's speaking about a different kind of joy, one that is profound and everlasting, because it is a joy that originates in Tiferes Hashem, the glory of God, the beauty of God, Hadarga Einai, and his greatness and glory. That's what we're meditating on when you think about the world and how beautiful it is, and how everything here is just a glimmer of the glory of God. That creates a certain joy in the heart. Towards the end of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings various meditations that can be used to create different states, emotional states. Here he's just alluding to this. There's going to be one kind of meditation that leads to love, and another one that leads to joy. Kasher eine hachacham, asher bereisha b'mayach chachmasoi b'nosoi, when the eyes of the wise person, which is in his head, I think it's in chapter 5, that the Alter Rebbe brings the story of the Yanuka, this young child who gives guidance to one of the sages, and he speaks there about this idea, the eyes of a wise person are in his head, and quotes the Zohar's question, where else is a person's eyes? But he's speaking, of course, the Zohar is referencing consciousness, that what are you driven by? Are you driven by your belly? Are you driven by your reproductive organs? Are you driven by jealousy and the shadow feelings in your heart? Or are you being driven by these eyes? Like parallel understanding, maybe people's notion of the third eye, but this is the eye of wisdom and understanding. The eyes of a wise person are in their head, and when they gaze, mistaklim bi'korah de malka, when they gaze at the glory of the king, there's going to be joy that is generated. So he says you'll have to look at the glory of the king, the tiferes gdulosai, and the beauty of his greatness, ad ein cheker ve'ein soif v'tachlis, understanding that no matter how much you understand, you can't plummet the expanse, the heights, the depths, the breadths of God's glory. In the Shabbat morning prayers, there's a beautiful prayer that's inserted, not there during the week, where we tell God, look, if I was as swift as a deer, and I had the expanse of an eagle, and on, I still would not be able to grasp or give praise for even one drop of who you are. But that's the meditation, to begin to stretch open and expand our heart. And then he says, as is explained elsewhere, and so to the other holy emotions in the heart, they originate in the consciousness, that's in the brain, the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge that have their embassy in in the brain. So that's the beginning of our understanding of the battle. It's just laying the land. There's this dual identity, and now we see that they operate so differently, emotive and rationalizing, or intellective and birthing feelings. What I'm going to do now is just turn to a couple of questions that have come in. One, is there a way to move a feeling from the heart to the brain and back, to shift unholy feelings to unholy ones? That question seems to presuppose the framework of one soul, two bodies. And our work must entail both souls. We have to hold on to ingrain this understanding that we are made up of a dual identity. So what happens is that the animal soul is emotive and the godly soul is intellective, and they work in opposite directions, heart to head and head to heart. And so if you want to shift a feeling that you have in a shadow feeling, let's call an animal soul feeling, you either need to think differently or behave differently. In the methods module on the tree, what's it called? I think Do Think. We use the tree as a model of how to bring about change, either from the head down or from the bottom up, which would, it's either from the branches to the roots, or from the roots to the branches, and then of course the trunk in the center is our emotional center. So if we want to shift the animal soul's feelings, you're either going to have to do things differently to generate a feeling, as we're taught in Sefer HaChinuch, the book of education, that feelings follow behavior, or you're going to have to think differently. The next question, how can one diminish, ideally eliminate, feelings of shame to enable love to flow in its entirety? Love for God, oneself or another, as well as receiving love from God or others. The first thing I want to say on that is that all feelings have positive and negative manifestations. So this is not about eliminating shame per se, but the negative manifestation of that. Healthy shame is called busha. Like busha, a busha in Hebrew today would be, like a shame, something shameful. But in Tanya, it's used in the sense of bashfulness, that there's something very healthy about feeling small and also feeling powerless. Surrendering that to a God who is all powerful. A similar example that we find discussed later in Tanya in terms of holy and unholy manifestations of the feeling would be atzvut, depression, or let's say bitterness. It's more bitterness. And merirus is bitterness. So there's merirus, bitterness, atzvut, depression, and atzvut, lethargy. And the Alter Rebbe tells us, when you have merirus, when you have bitterness, there's something positive there. Of course, you can have bitterness in your life. I was speaking to someone yesterday. She said she had read something, One Life, No Regrets. And I said, well, that would not be a very good life. I mean, I see the truth in it, but it wouldn't be a good life. If you didn't have regret, then you could never change. There would be no hope for us. But we have to have regret in a healthy sense. It means I am sorry for what I've done wrong, and then I take personal responsibility, and then I can begin to change. So merirus, bitterness, has some health. It's life-affirming. Atzvus, depression, is not. Depression has very little vitality to it, and that's why it leads to atzlus, lethargy. Healthy feelings have life in them, and they have life in them because there's still hope in them. There's some holy aspect to this feeling. So that's just a backdrop to the discussion of shame, that there is this positive aspect of shame. But then, of course, there's negative shame, which paralyzes us. And as the Alter Rebbe discusses later in the 20s in Tanya, he says that shame is about who you are. Guilt is about what you do, but shame is about who you are. How are we to deal with it? So I think that's significant in the question. We're not looking, this is not a question about guilt, it's about shame and the impact of what others have said or what we've done about our own identity. In essence, our identity is perfect. The godly soul is ever present and it is incorruptible and unwoundable. And not remembering that is in some way ill spiritual health, being out of alignment. One of the ways that we can deal with it is thinking about how we inculcated that. It's mental, not personal, meaning the shame someone else heaped upon me is more about their mental process rather than my person and who I am. And that's one of the things we speak about extensively in the method, which is own what is yours and don't own what is not yours. The second thing I would recommend is working on seeing yourself through a God-tinted lens. We're so used to experiencing ourselves through other people's mental projections. It's very liberating to see ourselves as God sees us. And even though God, as we say, Adam ro'ela enayim v'Hashem ro'ela b'av Adam, a person sees with their eyes and God sees to the heart of a person. God sees my heart. He sees all the negativity and the anger and the insecurity and the jealousy. He sees all of that, but he never loses sight of the goodness, the holiness that is within me, which is a part of him, a part of the Creator, not part of the creation. So seeing ourselves through God-tinted lenses is very useful. And the third thing I would recommend is reparenting ourselves, becoming the caregiver, the mother, the father that you wanted but never had. This is an extensive conversation and is covered at great length in the method. But in short, what it requires is that we use our consciousness, which are the parents, to take care of our emotions, the feelings of the children. And once we do that, we become cognizant of what's happening, then we're able to begin to master ourselves. I hope that was helpful, and thank you everyone for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.